The chandeliers blazed, laughter thundered, and glasses clinked. Yet on her 25th birthday, Samantha Carter sat alone in the shadows of her father's glittering ballroom. The crowd celebrated wealth and power, but not her. Then, through the sea of strangers, a single father and his son walked toward her. And with a few trembling signs, the night took a turn no one could have predicted. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. The chandelier blazed overhead, scattering light across polished marble floors and gowns worth more than most people's houses. Music thundered, laughter rose, glasses clinked, but Samantha Carter sat alone. It was her 25th birthday, yet not a single guest had spoken to her. She adjusted the folds of her silver dress, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Everyone knew she was deaf, and everyone pretended she wasn't there. Her father, Charles Carter, a man whose signature could move millions, stood at the center of the ballroom, whiskey in hand, smiling for the cameras. At his side was Veronica, her stepmother, glittering like she owned the night. Neither had so much as glanced toward Samantha since the party began. She forced herself to look down, hiding the burn of tears. If she cried, they would call her fragile. If she smiled, they would call it staged. Invisibility was safer, until she saw them. A man in a modest suit was making his way across the room, holding the hand of a boy no older than 8. They didn't belong here, not among the polished shoes and pearl necklaces. The man's tie was slightly crooked, the boy's jacket too big for his shoulders. They looked like they had wandered into the wrong world. And yet, the boy stopped and tugged at his father's sleeve. He pointed directly at Samantha. The man followed his son's gaze, then crossed the room. Samantha froze, certain he must be mistaken. But he wasn't. He knelt beside her table, his expression kind but steady, and with slightly shaky hands, he signed the words she never expected to see tonight. Happy birthday. Her chest tightened, eyes stinging. The boy grinned, signing clumsily, happy birthday too. Samantha's lips parted in disbelief. The twist came in the man's voice, low and clear. My son insisted we come say something. He said you looked just like his mom when she was sad. Samantha blinked, startled, speechless. No one here had remembered she was a person. And now, a stranger's little boy had compared her to someone he loved. For the first time all night, Samantha felt seen. Samantha's hands trembled as she signed back, "Thank you." Her movements were hesitant. She hadn't used sign language with anyone outside her tutor in months. The boy grinned proudly, turning to his father. "She understood me, Dad," he whispered. The man smiled faintly, then looked back at Samantha. "I'm Jacob Reynolds," he said. "This is my son, Eli. He insisted we come over. Hope we're not intruding." Intruding? The word nearly made her laugh. In a room full of people pretending she didn't exist, these two were the first to treat her like a person. She shook her head quickly, clutching the stuffed bunny Eli had just placed in front of her. "It helps me when I'm scared," Eli explained softly. "You can borrow it tonight." Her throat tightened. No one here had given her a gift, not even her own father. Jacob glanced toward the crowd, then leaned closer. "Do you want some fresh air? It's too loud in here, even for those of us who can hear." Samantha nodded, grateful. They slipped quietly through the side doors into the garden, fairy lights glowing against the night sky. The air was sharp and cool, a relief after the suffocating ballroom. For the first time that evening, Samantha could breathe. She looked up at the stars, her lips trembling with the start of a smile. Eli wandered to the fountain, fascinated by the rippling water. "You know," Jacob said quietly, "my sister was deaf. Taught me a little sign language when we were kids. Never thought it would matter again until now." The twist caught her off guard. His clumsy but heartfelt signing wasn't random kindness. It came from a history of love and loss. Samantha studied him, the way he stood solid and unpretentious. For once, she wasn't looking at another guest waiting to mock her silence. She was looking at someone who understood what it meant to live on the edges of other people's noise. Behind them, the garden door creaked. Samantha stiffened. Her father's tall figure filled the doorway, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on her, and on Jacob at her side. "What do you think you're doing out here?" Charles Carter's voice cut through the night like a blade. Samantha's heart lurched. The party inside had forgotten her, but her father had not. The cold air seemed to freeze around them. Charles Carter's polished shoes crunched against the gravel path as he stepped closer, the weight of his authority filling the quiet garden. "Samantha," he said sharply, "guests are asking where you are. You're embarrassing yourself. And me." His eyes flicked toward Jacob, lingering on the modest cut of his suit, then toward Eli by the fountain. Disapproval hardened his jaw. "Who are they?" Samantha's throat tightened. Normally, this was the moment she'd fold. Lower her eyes, retreat inside, let silence protect her. But Jacob's steady presence beside her made something shift. Her fingers tightened around Eli's stuffed bunny, and before she could think, her hands moved in sign. "They are my friends." Jacob translated out loud, his voice calm but firm. "She says we're her friends, the only ones who spoke to her tonight." Charles blinked, stunned for a moment, before his expression darkened. "Friends?" he scoffed. "At your birthday party, surrounded by the city's leaders, and this is what you choose?" Eli piped up before anyone could stop him. "She was alone. That's not how you treat someone on their birthday." His small voice carried more weight than anyone expected. The twist landed like a crack of thunder. A child had said aloud what no adult in that ballroom dared to admit. Charles's face flushed with restrained fury. For a second, Samantha thought he might actually argue with a boy. Instead, he straightened, voice icy. "Go back inside. Now, we'll discuss this later." Her pulse hammered. She looked at Jacob, then at her father. And for the first time, she didn't move. She lifted her chin, fingers trembling but firm as she signed. "I'm not invisible." Jacob's voice gave her words power in the air. "She says she's not invisible." The silence stretched. Charles's nostrils flared, but he said nothing more. With a sharp turn, he stalked back toward the ballroom, the door slamming behind him. Samantha's whole body trembled, but Jacob only gave her a small nod, as if to say, "That was yours, not his." For the first time in years, she felt the echo of her own courage. The garden was still vibrating with the echo of Samantha's defiance when the door creaked again. This time it wasn't her father, it was Veronica Carter. Her stepmother's heels clicked against the stone path, her sequined gown catching the garden lights. She looked flawless, but the sharpness in her eyes made Samantha's stomach knot. "Well," Veronica said with a brittle smile, "I should have known you'd sneak away. Do you realize how ungrateful you look? Your father throws you the most extravagant party of the year, and instead of mingling, you're sulking outside with—" Her gaze slid over Jacob and Eli, dripping with disdain. "Strangers." Samantha clutched the stuffed bunny closer. For years, she had endured Veronica's cutting remarks in silence. Tonight, the words still stung, but they didn't hollow her out the same way. Not with Jacob and Eli watching. Veronica leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "One day, when your father is gone, all of this could be yours. If only you stopped acting like a burden." That was the twist. Veronica wasn't just cruel. She was calculating. For her, Samantha's silence wasn't just weakness. It was leverage. Jacob's jaw tightened. He didn't speak right away, but Eli's small voice cut through before he could. "She's not a burden," Eli said, clutching the fountain's edge. "She's nice. She listened to me. She smiled when I signed. That makes her better than anyone in there." Veronica's smile faltered, just slightly. She hadn't expected a child to challenge her cruelty. Samantha's fingers trembled, but she lifted them anyway, signing with new steadiness. "I am not broken. You just never looked at me." Jacob translated softly, but his voice carried like a blade in the still night. "She says she's not broken. You just never looked at her." For a heartbeat, Veronica had no retort. Her lips pressed tight, her face pale under the garden lights. Then, with a huff, she spun on her heel and vanished back into the ballroom. Samantha stood frozen, breath ragged, but Jacob smiled faintly. You realize you just silenced the loudest person in this house? Her chest shook with the release of a laugh she hadn't felt in years. For once, she wasn't the shadow in her own story. The night air felt different now. Samantha leaned against the garden railing, her silver dress shimmering under the fairy lights. For the first time all evening, her shoulders weren't curled in defeat. They were lifted, steady, almost proud. Jacob sat on the low stone wall, his jacket open, looking as though he belonged anywhere but a millionaire's ballroom. Eli was crouched by the fountain, trying to balance coins on the rippling surface. You were brave in there, Jacob said gently, watching Samantha. His words were simple, but the way he spoke them, without pity, without performance, made her chest tighten. She signed back slowly. I've never said those things before. I didn't know I could. Jacob smiled faintly, translating her words aloud for Eli. The boy's face lit up. See? I told you she could talk with her hands, Dad. Samantha laughed, the sound small but real. She hadn't expected a child to make her feel more seen than an entire ballroom of adults. Then Eli fished something from his pocket, a small folded paper, crumpled from being carried too long. It's for you, he said, handing it over shyly. Samantha unfolded it carefully. Inside was a drawing of a girl standing alone beneath a huge chandelier. Beside her were two stick figures, a man and a boy holding her hands. Above them, in uneven block letters, Eli had written, "You are not alone." Her throat closed. No diamond gift from her father, no speech, no toast could compare to this. But just as the warmth of the moment settled, a twist slipped in. From the far end of the garden, two guests, executives who worked for Charles, stepped outside, their laughter breaking the quiet. They spotted Samantha instantly, her dress bright under the lights. One of them smirked. There she is. Poor Carter girl. Always hiding. They didn't see Jacob tense, his eyes narrowing, or Samantha clutch the drawing tighter. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she would shrink back or stand taller. The two executives strolled closer, their suits gleaming in the garden lights, their drinks still in hand. They barely glanced at Jacob, and they didn't notice Eli at all. Their eyes locked on Samantha, and one of them chuckled. Thought you'd slipped out early again, he said. Your father's inside working the room. You might try doing the same, unless, of course, you're planning on another quiet night in the shadows. His friend snorted. She doesn't answer you, remember? Waste of breath. Samantha's cheeks burned. For years, comments like that had rolled over her, cutting deep, leaving scars she never showed. Normally, she would have lowered her eyes, let it pass. But Jacob was watching. Eli too. And she still held the drawing in her hand. You are not alone. Her fingers began to move. Hesitant at first, then steadier. I'm not the one hiding. You are. Jacob translated, his voice calm but clear. She says she's not the one hiding. You are. The men blinked, caught off guard. One gave a mocking laugh. Hiding? We're the ones keeping this company afloat. What exactly do you think she? But Samantha lifted her chin, her hands moving again. You hide behind money and noise. I live in silence, and silence tells the truth. Jacob's voice carried her words across the garden like a blade. She says silence tells the truth. For a moment, neither man had an answer. The smirk slid from their faces. The laughter died. One muttered something under his breath and turned back toward the ballroom, the other trailing after him. Eli clapped once, grinning wide. You got them. Samantha's breath came fast, her heart pounding, but she didn't look down. For the first time in her life, she hadn't just endured the mockery. She had ended it. Jacob gave her a quiet nod of respect, and the twist came in his next words. You know, I've worked for men like them. They only understand power. And tonight you showed them you have it. Samantha blinked, startled. No one had ever said she had power before. But Jacob wasn't smiling to flatter her. He meant it, and that realization lit something fierce inside her. The echoes of the executive's footsteps faded, leaving only the hush of the fountain and the hum of city lights beyond the estate walls. Samantha's pulse was still racing, but it wasn't from shame anymore. It was from something new, pride. Eli bounced on his toes. "You were awesome," he whispered, holding the stuffed bunny like it was part of the victory. Jacob gave a faint smile, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. But the moment fractured when the garden door slammed open again. Charles Carter strode out, his expression thunderous, Veronica a step behind him with her usual glassy smile. The crowd inside must have noticed the absence, and the whispers had reached him. "What exactly is going on out here?" Charles demanded, his voice booming across the garden. His gaze locked on Samantha. "First you sneak away, then you parade yourself with strangers, and now I hear you've been making a scene with my business partners?" Samantha's chest clenched, but before she could sign a word, Jacob stepped forward. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "She didn't make a scene. She defended herself. That's something you should have been proud of." Charles's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to tell me how to raise my daughter?" His gaze flicked down to Jacob's worn shoes, then to Eli's oversized jacket. His lip curled. "You don't belong here." The twist came not from Jacob, but from Samantha. Her hands moved quickly, steadier than ever. "He belongs here because he saw me. You never do." Jacob translated firmly. "She says he belongs here because he saw her. You never do." For a beat, even Veronica's smirk faltered. Charles's jaw tightened. The weight of authority he always carried suddenly brittle under the raw truth of his daughter's words. He turned sharply, gesturing toward the ballroom. "Enough. We'll discuss this later in private." But Samantha didn't move. For the first time, she wasn't following him back into the noise. She stayed rooted to the garden floor, clutching Eli's drawing in one hand and the stuffed bunny in the other. Charles's eyes flashed, but so did hers. And for the first time, father and daughter stood as equals in the silence between them. Charles's stare hardened, his hand gripping the railing as though the weight of the moment threatened to unsteady him. "You're making a fool of yourself," he said, his voice low but seething. "And dragging strangers into family matters only makes it worse." Veronica slid in smoothly, her tone sugar-coated. "Darling, your father is right. These people," she waved a jeweled hand toward Jacob and Eli, "don't understand our world. They'll only embarrass you further." Jacob straightened, ready to speak, but Samantha's hands were already moving. Her fingers flew faster than before, sharp with emotion. "Maybe I don't want your world. Maybe I just want people who see me." Jacob's voice cut through the night as he translated. "She says maybe she doesn't want your world. Maybe she just wants people who see her." The twist hit like a crack of lightning. For the first time, Samantha wasn't just defending herself. She was rejecting the very pedestal they'd forced her onto. Charles's face paled. He had spent years building an empire, years telling himself everything he did was for appearances, for legacy. And now, on the night meant to showcase his power, his daughter was tearing down the facade. Eli, unaware of the sharp politics unfolding, tugged on Samantha's sleeve and whispered, "You can sit with us if you don't want to go back inside. My dad makes the best hot chocolate." The innocence in his words shattered the tension. Samantha's lips trembled, and a small laugh broke free. Not cruel, not mocking, just alive. Veronica's smile flickered. She hadn't expected Samantha to laugh in defiance. Charles, stone-faced, turned away with a curt, "Do what you want. But remember, without me, you have nothing." The garden door slammed behind him. Veronica lingered only long enough to hiss, "Don't test him, Samantha. You'll regret it." Then she swept back into the ballroom. Silence rushed in, broken only by the fountain's trickle. Samantha's breath came shallow, but Jacob leaned closer. "He's wrong," he said softly. "You've got everything you need right here. Your voice. Your choice." Samantha clutched Eli's drawing tighter. For the first time, she believed him. The garden was quiet again, the ballroom's music muffled behind heavy doors. Samantha stood near the fountain, the stuffed bunny pressed to her chest. Eli's drawing folded carefully in her hand. For years she had kept her silence as armor. But tonight, with Jacob and Eli beside her, something inside her cracked open. Her hands moved slowly, hesitantly. Do you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people and still be completely alone? Jacob's voice translated softly. Eli, watching intently, tilted his head. Sometimes, he whispered, when other kids don't let me play because I don't have the newest shoes. Samantha's gaze snapped to him, startled. A child's honesty had mirrored her own loneliness more than any adult ever had. She felt her throat tighten, but she kept signing. At every party they laugh, they toast, they smile, but no one ever talks to me, not even my father. I sit alone, invisible. Tonight I thought, maybe I would disappear and no one would notice. Jacob hesitated before translating those last words, his voice catching slightly. His own eyes flickered with something raw, because he knew that feeling, too. The nights he'd worked double shifts, thinking no one saw him. The mornings he'd packed Eli's lunch with shaky hands, wondering if he was enough. The twist came when Eli reached into his backpack again. He pulled out a worn Polaroid photo of Jacob holding him as a baby, both of them smeared with flour, laughing over a ruined attempt at pancakes. Eli pressed the picture into Samantha's hand. When I feel invisible, he said, Dad shows me this. He says it's proof we matter, even when the world doesn't look. Samantha's hands trembled around the photo. For years, her father had given her jewels, dresses, and banquets. Yet this boy had given her something she'd never had before. Proof that being seen wasn't about wealth, but love. She signed with quiet resolve. Maybe it's time I stop waiting to be noticed and start living. Jacob translated, his voice steady now. She says maybe it's time she stops waiting to be noticed and starts living. For the first time, Samantha believed her own words. The ballroom's noise pressed faintly against the garden doors. Music, laughter, the clink of champagne. For hours, it had been a cage for Samantha. But now, clutching Eli's drawing in one hand and his photo in the other, it felt different. Jacob stood beside her, steady and unhurried, his son leaning sleepily against his leg. You don't have to go back in if you don't want to, he said quietly. No one in there deserves you. Samantha looked at him, then at Eli. The boy's small hand reached for hers without hesitation, as if he'd known her all his life. Her lips curved into a fragile smile. Maybe they don't deserve me, but I deserve me. Jacob translated aloud, his voice proud. Eli grinned. With a breath that steadied her whole body, Samantha turned and pushed open the doors. The golden light of the ballroom spilled over her. But this time, she didn't shrink. Heads turned, some whispering, some smirking. As she walked back in, Eli's stuffed bunny tucked under her arm like a banner of quiet rebellion. Charles Carter, mid-conversation with a senator, froze at the sight. He expected her to bow her head, to slip quietly to her corner again. But Samantha didn't stop at the edges. She walked through the center of the room, chin lifted, her steps measured and sure. The twist came when Eli, clutching Jacob's hand, called out in a voice that carried over the music, "Happy birthday, Samantha." The orchestra faltered. Conversations broke. Dozens of powerful men and women turned. And for the first time in her life, Samantha was at the center of the room, not as a shadow, but as herself. She smiled, small, steady, but unmistakably hers. Later that night, when the guests finally left and the chandeliers dimmed, Samantha sat in the quiet with Jacob and Eli. She held the bunny against her chest and whispered, her voice soft but certain, "I'm not invisible anymore." And she knew it was true. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.